I'm one of the senior creative directors there, and I look after, I'm actually driving the podcast initiative there right now. And we're doing quite a number of things for the community as well as for clients, branded podcasts. On the side, I also do board advisory to startups, especially startups in distress or listcos in distress. So that's what I do for a living. So today, what I'm going to share with you is an overview of how to do podcasting. It is by no means, so I've got to state all the caveats up front first, it's by no means definitive, but it's meant to jog or start you on a path to see, oh, look, these are the options available, and this is what I can do. These are the things that that have been tried and tested, and then it's meant to then let you then go look at other stuff and other resources online yourself. Okay, so I'm going to be taking you through about 28 slides, and let me just start here. Okay. Can you guys see this? Okay. All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So podcasting for Christ, of course, the basis is Romans 10:17. So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And we want to look at today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through. Hang on a second. Okay, I'm going to take you through why podcast, content strategy and development, formats, how do you begin podcasting, 4 steps, I'll take you through it, cloud-based solutions, how do you get people to listen to your podcasts, and how do you make your podcast financially self-sustaining. For some, I'm just going to be taking you and just touching on it. For some, I'm going to delve a little bit deeper. So at the end of this session, you should be able to get an idea of how to create content, choose a format, set up a little podcast studio yourself or do remote recording. You should be able to start looking at cloud-based solutions, and you should also be able to market your podcast, get people to listen to it, and perhaps also raise some money for it. Okay? So let's just look at this. Why is sound so important? I think we've got to go back to the basics. You know, you feel it in the womb. A lot of people don't realize, but you spend 9 months of your growth interacting with sound and feeling sound, not so much listening to it, but feeling sound. It's a full body experience. So that's the first thing that as a human being you start off with. It evokes emotion. Okay, you don't have to take my word for it. If you think about the scariest movie that you've watched and you turn off the sound and watch it again, it doesn't work. Or if you take the most exciting action-packed movie like Fast and Furious, and you turn off the sound and watch it again, it doesn't work, because sound, music, and voice evoke emotion like nothing else. Okay, it resonates with the physical body, and that's to the first point as well. Babies, for the first 5 to 6 months, they see in black and white. Right, scientific studies tell us they see in black and white. And they can't see clearly. So as you grow, as you anchor yourself and adapt to life, you actually interact with the world in sound. Okay, so it involves the entire body and not just the senses of hearing itself. And it activates the imagination. So, again, I always like to tell this story when I'm speaking to different people. Oops, sorry. I think someone's got to turn off their mic because I'm hearing myself coming back. And it's a bit hard to speak. So if you don't have your mics muted, could I trouble you to mute your mics? Thank you. Okay, so it activates the imagination, and you don't have to take my word for it. But, for some of us who have, in the middle of the night, you've gotten woken up by a sound that's coming from the kitchen, right? The first thing you do is you sit up. Your heart rate increases, right? You start perspiring a little bit. your muscles tighten up. You're getting ready for a fight or flight. Why is that? It's pitch dark. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. You can't see anything. All you did was you hear sounds in the kitchen. But it activates the entire body, the body chemistry, physiologically, biologically, chemically. It affects us on all levels. And that's the effect of sound. So podcasting is actually rooted in sound. And that's why it's so important and so powerful. I'm going to let you guys hear something at this point. If you're on earphones, watch out. It might be a little loud, so you might want to turn it down just a little bit.
Something happened.
Let me teach you how to be a man.
That turned this future agent
I'm not that scared kid anymore.
into a deadly threat.
Don't do it!
Only one episode remains until the astonishing season finale.
I'm gonna finish what I started.
Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. next Tuesday at 8/7 Central.
Okay, when you listen to that audio clip and you listen to the voiceover, right? He says Tuesday, and the first thing that comes into your mind is some really big guy, right? Big chest, big voice. But the actual fact is that he's a very, very famous voiceover artist who's based in Brisbane, very popular in New South Wales and in Queensland. And he does a lot of American, US-based trailers. And this is how he looks like. His name's Lofty Fulton, and he's actually born with dwarfism. But he's very, very popular. But you see, when you listen to the sound, immediately your brain plays it up in a different way. And you have this preconceived notion. When I was a radio DJ on air in 1991 to 1993, we used to have to go out and do events. And I remember when I used to stand on stage, after I appeared on stage, people come up to me and says, "Oh, I never knew you looked like that. I always thought you looked like something else." And it's all because they never saw me. It's all about the sound. Okay, so that's why sound is so important. Understanding that. Why podcast then, right? Because podcast allows you to multitask. The power of the podcast is it goes beyond just, unlike video, you've got to sit down and really focus on it. You can't do things at the same time. You can't be shaving at the same time, preparing breakfast at the same time, and watching a video. There's low data consumption when on the move. So if you're on the move and you're streaming podcasts versus videos, it takes up a lot less data, so it costs less. It's also an immersive experience. Now, for videos, I know that some of you watch Korean dramas, or you watch a really good movie, you get sucked into it. You're very engaged and very captivated. But if you listen to a well-produced podcast, and I'll give you some examples later, you'll find that as you're listening to it, you feel like you're there. And that can never happen with video, not even with VR. It's a very, very different experience. Okay? Also, it's slightly lower in cost to produce because there are less factors of production, and it's a lot easier to share. So I'll go through that a little later, and you'll see the whole picture. So podcast content, the whole basis of it is that if you've got something interesting to say, and you've got a subject matter that's relevant, timely and engaging, then you've got to ask yourself, what emotional niche is your content filling? A lot of people, when they look at content marketing or producing content or producing podcasts, they have to look beyond the demographics. They have to look beyond stereotypes and beyond trends. Because a lot of the time, the people says, "Oh, let's see what's trending today. Let's make a video on that, or let's make a podcast on that." Or they says, "Oh, we're speaking to this sort of people. We're speaking to this particular demographic, this age group, or they're like this." Yes, you have to understand all that, but you've got to look beyond that and make sure that your content is familiar and true to life, that it's easy to understand. It offers people insight that they don't get anywhere else. It offers hope. If it's a podcast that is more authentic, people connect to it, and it offers them a sense of community. Community is not just a podcast speaking to a particular community, but you make them feel like they're part of a community. This is very much a radio thing, where radio has survived many cycles of new forms of media coming up. But why do people still get attracted to radio or listen to radio? Because it fosters a sense of community. They feel like the DJ is speaking to them one-to-one. And that's the power of the podcast. It's not, they don't get the feeling like, oh, I'm in the cinema and, I'm with many people watching this and consuming the content. It's a very one-to-one experience. So it's community. It also gives them information that goes back to familiar, true to life information, easy to understand information that also helps them to take that information and share it with a community of like-minded people. And that gives them a space to connect. And there's also emotional resonance. So you've got to make sure that the podcast content isn't just news, but it has emotional resonance. So we move then, right, once you've figured out what you want to say, to content strategy and development. So how do you develop the content? What's a strategy? How do you develop it? So a couple of things. First of all, you've got to have a theme. And theme meaning, what is the purpose of this podcast? Who are you speaking to? When you look at an audience, you've got to understand the consumption habits, you've got to understand what are the no-go boundaries. Content pillars, and content pillars basically is just a fancy term for the pain points that you need to address. Okay? And I usually keep the content pillars no more than 4 content pillars, and in 1 or 2 slides you'll understand what I'm talking about. Desired response, what is the single thing? Always go for the single thing you want them to do or to feel by the end of the episode or the end of the series. Then you've got to take that and come up with a story arc. How will you lead them through the journey in digestible stages? Okay, so with the content pillars, the story arc the different parts of the story arc have to feed back into the content pillars. And then you zoom into the episode structure, okay, because people like predictability, so you've got to structure things. And then, of course, talking points that you have to list out because they're the spine and the anchor reference point for the host and for whoever are the guests. Because if you don't have all these in place, I'm not saying that people can't just, put 2 mics on the table and then start speaking and, it sounds interesting and, the conversation goes where it goes, or you can't just put a mic on the table and start talking about a subject matter that you are very well versed in and are very passionate about. The danger with that is if you don't have this structure in place, then a lot of solo podcasts can end up becoming rants. And if you don't have this structure in place, when you have an interview style podcast, what happens is that a lot of people can then talk out of point. And if you have a guest who's very, very gregarious, the entire podcast can then go askew and go off topic, and you can lose listeners and people tune out because of that. So while I'm not saying that everyone should, most should, because there are some people who, like radio DJs, give them 2-3 points, they can spin an entire conversation that sticks within 60 seconds out of it, and they're very good at controlling and shifting the conversation and guiding the conversation with guests. But not everyone has that gift or that training, so it's very helpful, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we're working where I work. We're actually doing a community project called the Biz Hacks Podcast, 10 minutes, 12 episodes each. And this is to address and help the small, medium businesses in Singapore who are going through a really, really rough time and trying to reinvent themselves. So I'll just show you what we've done here with the story arc and understanding, why you're doing this. So this is basically this is not the mission statement. This is where your content pillars come in, and this is the one single thing you want people to get out of this podcast series. So the series will focus on post-lockdown biz hacks. It's supposed to handhold the small, medium businesses through 4 steps of rebuilding and strengthening the business. So it's supposed to do 2 things and help them not just to survive, but thrive in this environment. And you state the environment. And by focusing on 3 content pillars of people, money, and connectivity. So you've got the story arcs, and you says, okay, so all the episodes need to feed into that. Okay, into that narrative. So how do we do this in 4 steps of a story arc? First of all, we says, look, let's start off with the first episode of this with building financial resilience, and you list the topics, everything from restructuring debt, restructuring cash flow, getting them to not have to worry about money for the next 6 months to 12 months. Then you take them to the next step of the story, and that's building digital capabilities. So you look at productivity tools, secure remote working, migrating their local service to the cloud, basically helping them transform their businesses. So once you've settled your cash flow and you can focus on building your business and transforming it, what do you do then? You look for new markets. Right, and once you look for new markets, you have to look at digital marketplaces, the etiquette to operate in these new spaces, and payment gateways. And once you've got all that in place, you can't run the business alone, so you've got to look at people. So building human capital, right? So you notice how all this fits back into the people, money, and connectivity content pillars, and how we've then built it up as a story arc. And as someone listening, you can see, oh, I get it. I see how I can get my business back on its feet and how I can take it beyond just being back on its feet. And it's all the things that are relevant to them, very pertinent, very timely topics, and they feed back into the 3 content pillars of people, money, and connectivity. And at the end of it, listeners should be able to have a roadmap to rebuild and strengthen their business to survive and thrive. Yeah. Okay. Content strategy and development. So so I've showed you this this part, right? So what we need to do next is, once you get the story out, you go into the episodes, right? So in this case, 4 episodes, and an episodic template looks like this. So this is what I use. I've got I've got 2 podcasts that I record on a weekly basis. This is called the Archippus Podcast, and the Archippus Awakening is a book written by Henson Lim. He's quite a popular speaker. He's been around for a couple of years, and it talks about how getting awakened, aligned, and assigned is crucial to a fulfilling Christian life and fulfilling the calling or the assignment God has for you. So I write this out. So Henson would then says, okay, for the next week, I want to talk about these points. Then I flesh it out. I script the opening, I script the end, and that is usually a template I just tweak because this comes out every episode, minor changes. But then the questions. So when you go down to the questions, I'm going to try to move my mouse. If you look at the questions, I have no more than 4 questions, ideally 3 questions, 3 talking points, right? And within each, no more than 2 or 3 points, sub-points that you want to go into. And then I would send this back to Henson, my guest, and we talk through it. And we'd make tweaks and changes, and then you see the episode flow. Now, a lot of the time, in my experience, when guests and speakers have this, they still tend to go off topic because something interesting might be said, and you start talking about that. But then having this is the backbone, like we were saying earlier, it's the backbone and the reference point. You have a center point to pull things back to. So the host, as well as the guest, knows exactly how to pull the conversation back so it doesn't go off topic. When you list it out like that as well, you can see how much time you need. So this is a 20-minute podcast. The top and the back would be about 1 minute 30 seconds. So you've got about 18 minutes to play with. Divided out by 4, and you get a couple of minutes for each section, right? So that's a host and presenter's reference sheet. It's a good thing to have if you're planning a podcast, right, on the episode level. And then if you're working with a third-party audio engineer, and I know that there are 1 or 2 audio engineers here, this is our producer and engineer's reference sheet. So, we did something for Singapore's Prime Minister's office 3 months ago. It's a Hello Love podcast, and we basically interviewed some stars, TV personalities about, their relationships. And so we recorded everything, but because there were mistakes, we had to cut and paste and repackage the entire episode. This is a template that would be useful for someone that's actually packaging the episodes together. So you've got time codes. If you look at the TC under the column TC, you'll see when it starts, when it ends, and they'll know exactly where it starts and when it ends. Yeah. So this is also a useful template to have for production. So once we've looked at that, and you kind of get a sense that, okay, so that's how I'm going to come up with an idea of what to say in a podcast, or what my podcast series is all about, how I'm going to structure the podcast, right? And then you go down to all the episodic levels and story arcs. Then what podcast format do you choose? Yeah. So you have the interview style, and I'll introduce you to 3, and it's not limited to 3, it's limited to your imagination and how much time you have and who you're talking to. But I'm going to spend the next about 9 minutes playing you 3-minute examples of podcasts, so you can just sit back and relax a little bit and have a listen to the different styles. So this one I'm going to play right now is an interview style or conversational style. And this is the Archipus podcast that I do with Henson Lim. So you see the introduction, the introductory music theme music, and then I've got the introduction, and then we start talking, we get into the questions. So I'll play you 2 to 3 minutes of it, and then we'll move on to the next. Okay? Here we go.
This is the Archipus Podcast with Henson Lim and Keith.
Welcome to the Archipus Podcast with Henson Lim. I'm your host, Keith, and in this series, we're going to explore the Christian notion of destiny and calling, or as Henson calls it, your assignment. The series follows Henson Lim's paradigm-changing books, Say to Archipus and Alignment Check. The foundations of the books are based on being awakened, aligned, and assigned. In today's episode, we're still in Chapter 1 as Henson talks about the 7 great lies in the church today that are causing Christians and the church to slumber. We'll also look at passages in the books of Isaiah and Matthew to reflect on the condition of our hearts and the present challenges that we face in our faith. The big question this week is, are we living with a kingdom mindset, or are we just playing church? Henson, let's dive straight into the deep end. What are the 7 great lies in the church today that's causing us not to awaken or stay awake in our spirit?
Well, that's a wonderful topic there. 7 great lies in the church. Let me first give credit to Steve Hill. This article was written by him. I chanced upon it as I was doing some research to see whether the church is really asleep or what's keeping us in slumber.
Yeah, so that's an interview or conversation style. So it really, this interview style, this format really depends on the strength of your presenters and the strength of your guests. If you've got guests who come on board and they're not very articulate, or they're not very good forming their thoughts on the fly, then it makes it a little bit more difficult to produce and to post-produce it. So you've got to always remember, if you're doing an interview style, make sure your guests are quite gregarious, they're quite affable, and they can think quickly on their feet. The second format is actually a narrative, and a narrative kind of overlaps with a dramatic format, a dramatized format. So I'll just play you this narrative format. It's 3 minutes long. It's something that we did a couple of years back for the Ministry of Home Affairs, and it's to promote that we actually depend on each other quite a lot. So here we go.
People often talk about how fast Singapore moves. At the end of the week, most people don't know where the week went and have trouble remembering who they met. Sometimes when I see the elderly sweeping the floors or cleaning the public toilets, I notice people just walking by them like they don't exist. And I wonder, when I get to that age, will anyone stop to even offer me a smile? But my mother told me a story that gave me hope. It was a Wednesday afternoon.
It was a Wednesday afternoon. Madam Hamina was walking home from the mini-mart. She was balancing on the narrow road divider. This was no ordinary day. Madam Hamina, who lived alone, was just recovering from a fall and was precariously balancing on crutches while struggling with a plastic bag of rice and groceries.
The traffic was moving very fast on both sides of the road, and I felt very unstable and very afraid.
It was peak hour and everyone was rushing. The wind created by the passing cars almost buffeting Madam Hamina off the divider. Trembling and tearing, Madam Hamina crouched forward.
A few meters away from me, I saw this old woman on crutches carrying plastic bags that looked very heavy. I could see that something was wrong, but her face was turned away from me. She didn't realize it, but her position caused the foot of one of her crutches to be right at the edge of the divider.
Mr. Hing slowly walked towards her, careful not to alarm her. He suddenly became aware of the precarious position Madame Hamina was in. Just then, a lorry rushed past, and the gust of wind and dust flew into Madame Hamina's eyes, startling her and knocking her off balance.
Oh, it all happened so fast. I saw her slipper, the crutch flying onto the road. I ran forward, grabbed hold of her, and suddenly I heard a snap. Oh, I feared the worst.
The snap Mr. Hing heard was the crutch being snapped into pieces by a passing car, just centimeters away from the edge of the divider.
I held on to Madame Hamina for a good minute or so. I was afraid to let her go. I think she was still in a shock, just like me.
My heart was beating so fast and I felt lightheaded. For a moment I thought I had been hit. I never thought anyone noticed me, but this man saved my life.
Now, I always make a special effort to say hello to elderly workers and people I met on the street. Even though I may not end up saving their life, I end up brightening their day and mine too. And who knows, one day I will make a difference that I can't even imagine. Just like Mr. Hing did to Madame Hamina. We need each other more than we realize.
Yeah, so you notice that the narrative is a combination of someone that's actually narrating the whole thing. There's a story to it, and then you also have interviews of people, and we try to localize the voices as much as possible. So wherever you are in the world, if you're producing a narrative, then this is your chance to really tap onto local talents and a local voice, because then it resonates a lot more with the audiences that are listening to it. Now, the third sort of format I want to feature today is a dramatized format, and this is something that we did for Tourism Western Australia several years ago. It's to promote a region in WA called Margaret River, and Margaret River is sort of like a wine and cheese area, and it's a holiday destination for romance. So that's what they wanted to market that particular destination for. So in terms of how we did it, was we took a true story of a guy called Tim Negus, whom we called over the phone and interviewed. He built a chapel for his wife with his bare hands with his mates. And his wife is a painter, so he hung all of her paintings in this chapel in Margaret River. So this is a dramatized story based on Tim Negus's story, but then being dramatized. It's not a true story, but it was used as a marketing campaign. So have a listen.
It wasn't easy. I was always traveling, and Richard was always pulling all-nighters at the office.
Where are we going? Is there even an us anymore?
Richard.
We gotta go.
She suggested we go away together.
Welcome to Margaret River. It's a beautiful day today to be out in the woods. Please follow.
Wine country, clear blue skies, crisp fresh air, and wide open space. I really didn't see how it was going to help us.
I can't believe you come all this way to pick a fight with me when we're supposed to be working on us.
You don't care about us. It's all about your stupid holiday.
That was last night. Maybe there isn't an us anymore. Maybe Richard was right. And I saw it. A chapel in the woods. On its stone walls, a sign read, Chapel of the Flowers. It seemed to call out to me.
May I help you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just looking. I saw the doors of this lovely chapel open, and I wandered in to look at the paintings.
You're holidaying in Margaret River alone?
No. My husband's still asleep, so I thought I'd come for a morning walk. About the paintings.
Beautiful paintings, aren't they? All 102 of them.
Beautiful chapel to hang them in.
I built it for my wife, Patricia.
Built it?
She paints, and the thing is, in her paintings is everything about her I fell in love with years ago. So in the summer of 2002, I got some of my mates and worked through the next 2 summers and winters to build this chapel for her.
With your bare hands?
Every mud brick, every floorboard. When you love someone that much, you want every part of them never to leave you. So all this is for my Patricia and her paintings.
Wow.
Now, what were you looking for?
Love? Romance?
Well, it's in the air at Margaret River.
Hey! Patricia!
Patricia?
My husband, Richard.
Tim Negus.
Hi.
Good to meet you, Richard. Now, I never caught your lovely wife's name.
Patricia Lee. Richard took my hand. He felt warm in the cool winter's morning.
Pat, I thought you'd left.
Richard.
Don't leave.
I never did. I drew in a deep breath of Margaret River air. And I knew right then that we were going to be all right.
Margaret River, Western Australia, where romance lives.
Yeah, so you see how we can use sound, a combination of music, voice, and script writing to actually tell stories with podcasts. And when you listen to the interview, if you're paying attention to it, you feel like you're actually there with the two blokes that are talking. You have a narrative and a dramatized. It's an immersive experience. It's not just like you feel like, oh, I'm listening to this content, but you actually feel that you're there with them, watching them like a bystander, and that's a feeling that you get with podcasting because you're making use of sound. Okay. All right. So which format do you use? It really depends on the audience that you're talking to. It depends on the subject matter, the resources, and the time that you have. So when you get to the narrative types of podcasts and you get to the dramatized type of podcasts, you can see that there's a lot more production value that goes into it. It's about writing the script to a particular timing. It's about finding music and editing that music to hit the right points to punctuate, points where the voiceover talents will have to hit, where crescendos at a certain point to bring a particular emotion across. And then, you talk about sound effects as well. So when you're listening to the dramatized podcasts or the narrative podcasts, you can actually almost see the situation in your mind, because it's your mind, the imagination, that's doing the work more so than the podcast. The podcast just functions as a vehicle to open that up. So it's quite interesting when you use audio as a format to reach out. So where do you begin? We're going to look at 4 different things. We're going to look at people, and people who are hosting, on the front end of it, people who are at the back end of it, the production side of it. So the people who write the scripts for you, who write the stories for you, and who produce it for you, the audio engineers. Or if you're doing both on your own, then, there's a certain type of people that we look for. We're also going to delve into the types of equipment that can be used, and I'll be sharing what I've used or what I would recommend because we've tested a few. Then we're also going to look at the location, whether you're doing a on-location podcast where you set up a small podcast studio, or if you're doing remote recording. And then we're going to look at cloud-based apps. So if you don't have a lot of equipment and you've just got a basic PC or laptop, how do you do a podcast to begin with? Or if you just have a mobile phone, how do you do that? So the first thing we're going to look at is people. So when you look at hosts and speakers, I think the biggest thing is the hosts and speakers for podcasts have to be comfortable with no physical audience. A lot of people, and I get that way as well, I'm quite shy when it comes to speaking to a crowd of 4 to 6 people socially. So if you put me into like a small party with friends, I'm not very good in that kind of context. But you get me in front of an audience of 1,000, 2,000 people, and I shine. Because when you speak, and you hear your own voice through this massive sound system that's going out to the audience, and you feel the energy that comes back from the audience when you say something and they respond to it. You can feel it. You can feel it in a way that you can't in a studio that is, almost completely dead of any reverberation or sound. And you can't really feel it, especially on a Zoom thing. I can't react to you guys. I can't see your reactions to me, so I can't play off that. So not everyone's comfortable with that, Some people need a physical audience. So as a host or a guest, you've got to be comfortable with no physical audience. You've also got to be comfortable hearing yourself in the headphone. Because a lot of people hear themselves speaking, but when they put the headphones on, they get messed up. And they either freeze or they try to sound a certain way because they suddenly realize, oh my gosh, should I sound like that? Or I'm supposed to sound like a broadcaster. I'm supposed to sound like, I aspire to be like this podcaster, so I've got to sound a certain way. So, you unconsciously do things with your voice that make you sound less like yourself. But the whole purpose of the podcast is people connect to podcasts because they're authentic. They've also got to be fairly fast on their feet. So like in the Archipus podcast with Henson, sometimes as we're having a chat, even though we've got the pointers, I'd throw him a question and he'd respond very quickly on his feet, or he'd come up with a comment that I would respond to. So you've got to be fairly fast on your feet. You've got to speak from the heart, because the microphone does not lie. There are no visuals in podcasting to distract the mind. So the mind is completely focused, on the voice. And the voice, the Bible says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And you can actually tell sometimes when a telemarketer calls you up and says, oh, hello, Mr. Tan, you've been chosen for this. Immediately, look, this is rubbish. Right, and it's not so much because of the content that they're talking, that they're sharing, but it's the way that they're sharing it, because it's not from the heart. So the different ways to say hello. So if I just do a quick demonstration, I can say, "Hey, hello," or I can say hello, or I can say hello, or I can say hello, and the feeling that's attached to that word makes the meaning of the word so different. So speaking from the heart is very important. So if you've got someone that is trying to be someone that they're not, or they're trying to be a personality, then chances are they won't make a very good host or speaker unless they're very highly professionally trained. You've got to be curious and have a genuine interest in people as well. That's very important, because as a host, or you're sharing about a subject matter, you've got to have a certain amount of passion for it, and that passion will come across in the voice. Thirst for learning also ties in with curiosity and genuine interest for people. They've got to be in touch with the audience. So if the audience are locals, you don't speak, or use words or big words and sentence structures that are hard to understand. So you've got to understand your audience. You've got to be networked and well received, and I'll go into that a little later when it comes to the marketing side of why you need to be networked and well received. You've got to believe in bringing the word through audio, and you've got to be able to captivate by speech. So you know how some people, when they walk into a room and they start speaking, everyone just stops and keeps quiet and listens to them. And there are other people who get on stage and try to speak, and everyone's still kind of talking to each other. So it's a lot to do with a person's aura and a person's voice, the timbre of the voice as well. And the last and most important thing is that they've got to be willing to keep the ego in check. Now, with my, I'll just share this on a personal note, because I was a radio DJ a long time ago for 3 years as a career, as part of my job. And, you get to a point where you start looking at ratings, you start looking at the number of people that listen to you, the number of people that engage with you. And when you put your podcasts on, of course, you want to spread it to as many people as possible. And you start looking at the analytics that come back to you from the different platforms that you share it on. And of course, you're concerned about likes, shares, and people who comment, right? Because you want people to talk about your podcast. The problem with that is that there comes a certain point where you cross into the gray area and the ego steps in. And then it becomes, I didn't get so many likes, I didn't get so many shares, I didn't get, what am I doing wrong? And then you start taking your content on a path in pursuit of that, rather than communicating a content that God has put on your heart. So that's a very, very important point to note. You look at the production people, they've got to have a fascination with sound, audio, spoken word, some technical knowledge or bent, or they like to get technical because some of it can get a little bit technical. They've got to have a musical ear, and that's important because sometimes you want to put music to it, and timing is very important. If you're writing for a podcast and you're writing the story arcs and writing the episodes out, then you've got to have at least some experience in media, in comms, PR, news, or advertising, especially if you're doing narrative podcasts or if you're doing interview or conversational style podcasts. I'm not saying that skill can't be learnt. Some people have a natural gifting for it, but it is helpful if you're looking for a team of people to have people with that sort of background. You've got to have a heart to bring the word through an audio-based medium. For audio-based medium like radio, podcasting was started a long, long time ago. But, there will always be naysayers that will say, no, video is going to take over everything. It's not a visual medium. It's going to fail. But look at where podcasting is now. And again, willing to keep the ego in check. That's very, very important, especially if you're doing this for the church. This is it's just a given because it's so easy, once someone comes up to you and says, oh my gosh, that was a great series, or that was a great episode that you did, really spoke to my heart. But then it's really not about you, isn't it? It's about, sharing the word. So where do we begin? Again, we come back to people, equipment, location, cloud-based apps. Now let's move into the equipment. So this one, if you're not into the equipment, might be a little bit dry for you, but if you are into the equipment, it's quite exciting. So if you're producing on location, you need an audio workstation. An audio workstation is basically a computer loaded up with some audio editing software. Here are the specs that are recommended. This is not hard and fast rule, and it differs a little bit from a PC-based system to a Mac-based system. Yeah, but this is generally where you want to be. Okay, then you want to get a microphone. And there's some microphones that I would recommend, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. You have to have a pop filter. So like the microphone that you have here, if you can see me on the little square, I've got a microphone here, and I've got a pop filter, because without the pop filter, a lot of the P's, and it'll distort the voice, and you get a lot of pops, which you don't want. Then you've got to have a mixer board. In this case, I would recommend that you go with the Rode Rodecaster Pro, because it's great for podcasting and podcasters, and I'll show you why. If you can see this on your screen, if you're looking at this from a computer screen, not a mobile phone screen, you'll see that it takes up to 4 microphones. So if you're doing on location, you set it up in your room, or you set it up in an office. It basically gives you up to 4 people, including yourself, if you're the host, to come in and record. Then you've got 4 headphone outs, right? So you can have 4 headphones being monitored. You can also take a mobile phone, so you can get people to call in and run it like a radio show. And if you look at the front of this little board, this Rodecaster Pro, you've got these 8 buttons that are lit up. And these 8 buttons are programmable, meaning that you can just plug this in via USB to your computer and transfer, drag and drop audio files into each of these buttons. So you can assign. So the top right hand button could be your opening music. Then the top left button could be your ident. It could be one of those bumpers that you have. Just to punctuate a particular sentence. You can have a laugh track or whatever it is. So this keeps things very flexible. And in Singapore dollars, I think it won't cost more than $1,200. So you're really, really getting value for money. The other thing is that you need headphones or earphones that need to be wired, and that's very important. Okay, if you're a remote production, and that gets a little bit more interesting, an audio workstation, right, or a computer, a USB microphone, and the USB microphones that I recommend here are the Audio-Technica ATR 2100 and the Samsung G-Track Pro, which is the one that I'm using. And the differences in the microphone, the Samsung G-Track Pro, which I use, has quite good background noise rejection, and it really captures the nuances of the voice. Because it is a condenser microphone, it is a lot more sensitive. But because it's sensitive, if you don't have a fairly quiet environment, it'll pick everything up, from your fan to buses, driving past, a kilometer away. It picks everything up, and it picks up your saliva. So if you've got a dry tongue, then you hear a lot of clicks and that in your voice. The one that I've recommended a lot of churches to use is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100, and the reason for that is because it's a dynamic mic. So the pattern is a cardioid pattern, which means that it's got good background noise rejection qualities. It also has a USB, so you can plug it in directly into your laptop or your desktop. And the beautiful thing about this mic is that it costs less than $150, I think. You've got to get a windshield for it, but this microphone also has an XLR connection at the bottom, just beside the USB output. So if you don't use this as a USB mic, you can use this as a live stage mic at church. So it's dual purpose, and it sounds very good. It's got a very nice, round, rich, robust sound to it. Good noise rejection, and it can function as a podcasting mic or a live mic. Remote recording, always remember wear wired headphones or wired earpieces. This is especially if your guest is recording from home and they don't have a computer and they're recording using a mobile phone. Make sure that they're recording with a wired earpiece. Never ever use earpods, because they have terrible sound, and you can't get rid of it even through very good post-production. Both of you will have to have either a LAN connection or a stable mobile connection. Wi-Fi doesn't play very nicely when you're doing remote recordings as well. When it comes to software, if you're doing remote recording, I would recommend this thing called Mixpad. Of course, the industry standard is DigiDesign's or Avid Pro Tools. And Pro Tools is a digital audio workstation software that's used all over the world, from Hollywood movies to producing ads and doing scoring, that sort of stuff, composing. But that tends to cost a little bit, and it works best with a Mac. But this one that I use personally for all my podcasts is by NCH Software. You can buy it for less than $70 Sing. And this gives you a multi-track recorder, so you can put all your tracks inside. You can record it at the same time. They've got effects. You can compress. All the functionalities that you need. It's fairly easy to use, quite intuitive. It takes you maybe 2 or 3 days to learn. It'll take you a week to master. And you probably won't use everything that it offers, but it's quite a powerful, quite an affordable software, Mixpad. So you can Google it and download a free trial version and have a play with it. So now we look at location. Production location. If you're setting up your own little podcast studio, this is what it should look like. Right, if you're producing, you've got to have the producer in the center with a computer, and then you've got to have mics mounted on the table, and you see all these little things. It's branding for them, but they also they brand their windshields. Nice to have chairs where the guests can all face each other and look at each other in the eyes. You don't need a very large space, and you don't need fancy furniture. As you can see, a lot of this is like probably from IKEA or somewhere similar. And you look at the one at the bottom. So the host is also the one that's recording and editing it. So he's got the computer beside him, and these are, whereas the top one is a little bit more fancy because they've got the spring-loaded arms, and you can drag them here and there. These ones are just kind of fixed, and you can just move the position, but you can't control the height. You can just angle the mic, so it doesn't need a very, very large space. Half of your bedroom, would do. Of course, you need a quiet room, no ambient noise leakage of more than 25 decibels. Otherwise, the mics tend to pick it up. As an indication of how noisy is noisy, your fridge is about 50 decibels, 50 to 55 decibels. Air conditioner is about between 38 and 45, and even those get picked up by the mic, so you've got to have it fairly quiet. Tabletop with enough space, I've gone through that, and chairs and mic stands, and quiet central air conditioner, or you cool the room down first, and once you start recording, you turn off the aircon, turn off the fans, seal the windows. All right? That's where you get a clean recording. You don't have to do a lot of post-production to clean up the noise. Remote productions. Okay, this is what it looks like. So what I have looks very similar to this. I've got my microphone, my laptop, and I've got earphones instead of headphones. I make sure that the room that I have is quiet, and I make sure my guests also are in a quiet room. And if they're connecting via mobile devices, they need to be in a room that's free of ambient reverb, so they can't be sitting in an empty room, and it's going to sound like they're sitting in a toilet and talking to you, right? And they've got to be on wired headphones or wired earpieces all the time. Same rules apply on their end and your end. Turn off the aircon, turn off the fans. And cloud-based apps. So cloud-based apps is useful if you're recording remotely. I use CleanFeed, and I found it to work. We've tried several, but I found CleanFeed to be the most stable. You can pay for the CleanFeed to get multi-track recording, and here you see a multi-track recording screen. This guy's got 4 people, including himself. So this David Thomas is the guy that's hosting the podcast, and he's also recording it. Then he's got Hugh, Steve, and Julia, and they're 3 of his guests, and they can be sitting anywhere in the world. I use this program to record my podcasts with Henson Lim for the Archivist podcast that you heard. And he's sitting in his home in his pajamas. I'm sitting in my pajamas, and we record this at 11 a.m. every Thursday morning or whatever time that we set. And this is how it looks like. Now, the beautiful thing about this cloud-based app is that for the paid version, and the paid version cost me, I think, about $53 a year. So it doesn't really cost a lot. And it allows cloud recording. So after I finish the recording, I can download it onto my desktop, and then I can throw the separate files. So his voice comes as a separate file, my voice comes as a separate file. I throw that into my MixPad multi-track, and I can mix the music in. I can cut and paste and package the entire program. So that's the beautiful thing about CleanFeed. There are other cloud-based solutions, so I would encourage you to go Google it and look for cloud-based multi-track recorders. Of course, if you pay for it, you get a lot more functionality. But basically, it means that you don't need to set up fancy equipment at home, and you can do this fairly cheaply and fairly easily, with a cloud-based solution. But the thing that you have to remember is that you have to have connectivity, LAN connectivity, not Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi tends to get a little bit dodgy, and then you get dropouts and stuff like that. Now, if some of our guests have said, but I can't see you and I don't like that, then you can launch Zoom or Skype on the side while you're recording, and then you can see each other. But you just have to mute the audio from Zoom and make sure that the CleanFeed gets priority in the mic and it isn't hijacked by Zoom. So now we come to the interesting part. Now that you've figured out what you want to say, you've got an interesting podcast that you believe people want to listen to. You've got your content pillars all set up. You've got your story out all set up and broken down into parts and feeding back into the content pillars. And you've got all your episodes planned out. And you've got your fantastic guest, fantastic host. You recorded it, you packaged it, and it sounds very tight, very exciting, pacey, and people that you share it with says, "Oh my gosh, this is really great. I want to share this. Can I share this?" And you go like, "Great, okay," but you're only sharing it with maybe 50, 60 people. Now, how do you get people to know about your podcast? And that comes to the issue of discoverability. So there are a few types of podcasts that, and that ties in with discoverability. There's influencer-led podcasts. So, video influencers, Instagram influencers, people who consider them influencers, whether you are a mass influencer or you're a micro influencer, where you have more specific targeted groups, but smaller groups that they speak to. If they start a podcast, they've already got a following, so it's easy to spread your podcast that way. So if you're looking for a host, sometimes for certain things, it's good to work with an influencer as a host or as a guest. The content-driven podcasts, so if, say, for example, COVID-19 is the topic of the day, in this particular case, it's 5 tips for being a data-driven marketing genius, featuring Ruth Stevens, then people will be drawn to that particular content. So that spreads on its own because that's the topic of the day. Then you've got branded podcasts. So branded podcasts are what I'm involved in mainly, and we go to brands, BMW, we go to Singtel, we go to Microsoft, and we say, hey, look, we're putting together a podcast, and they'll talk about your products, but from your customer's point of view. So we do an interview style podcast, and it's more informative than dramatized. In this particular case, Jack Daniels has an official podcast called Around the Barrel, and it's very brand driven, and it's centered on the brand, and all the podcasts talk about is Jack Daniels and its history, how it's made an impact to different people, impact to human history. It's quite interesting. If you have a listen to it, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So branded podcasts are more brand centric, and if a brand pushes it, they already have loyalists and loyal followers. They also probably have social media pages that people follow. So when you do a branded podcast, then discoverability doesn't become so much of a pressure because they can share it on their social media pages. Then you've got traffic drivers. So, of course, if you have a church podcast, you've got to then seed it onto the different social media platforms. Social media platforms then become the conduits of publicity to draw people in. So if you've already got an Instagram following, your church has a Facebook following or LinkedIn following, and the host has a LinkedIn following, the guest has a LinkedIn following, and Facebook Insta following or Twitter following, all that helps. So collectively, if everyone involved in the podcast publicizes it, plus the organization that's responsible for putting the podcast together publicizes it, the collective effort then drives traffic to the podcast. So social media is a traffic driver. Now, the other way of making the podcast discoverable is using these tools. So again, this is a cloud-based app. It's called Anchor. It's quite popular. If you look at the bottom of the Anchor screen, it says Anchor is all-in-one platform where you can create, distribute, and monetize your podcast from any device for free. So this allows you to produce podcasts using even just your mobile phones. The minute you get into Anchor, if you log onto it and just play around with it, sign up, play around with it, you find that once you produce your podcast, they will auto-publish it for you, or you can publish it yourself to the different platforms. But when they auto-publish it for you, I think right now they publish it to 6 different platforms, which include the 3 major players, which is Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. And Apple Podcasts had the lead on everyone. They started first, but they got a little bit complacent, and Spotify came in and has basically taken the top spot in terms of the number of podcasts and number of listeners. However, Google's kind of like, not really here, not really there. They're not very popular. In some circles they are. But for business podcasts, people tend to gravitate to Apple. For entertainment-based podcasts, people seem to gravitate to Spotify. That's according to figures that are being published. So it's quite interesting to see how the landscape has changed, but I'm sure moving forward things will change again. Now, the third point about discoverability is having a website. And why is having a website important? People say, hey, look, I'm already on Apple Podcasts, I'm already on Google, I'm already on Spotify. People will know about me. The problem is that if people don't know about your podcast and they don't go to the search functions in the particular Spotify, Apple, or Google podcast apps, it's quite hard to find you. So having a website, as you can see, this is Cathedral SG Live. So St. Andrew's Cathedral has a streaming radio app, but they also have a website, and you see Cathedral SG Live, which is right here where my mouse is. Okay, you can actually listen to the streaming radio, and when you do a search for Cathedral podcast, so Cathedral SG Live has a little podcast button. So when you type into Google and you do a Google search of the Cathedral podcast, here's what comes out, and this is where SEO is key. I've given a link to Rachel Corbett. She's an Australian SEO specialist and a digital specialist of sorts. Have a look at her website. She gives really, really very practical tips in a way that you can understand. But SEO is the key, because if you have a website, when you do a search for the Cathedral podcast, have a look at the screen capture I've done. The Cathedral website comes up tops in the search. Then you've got the podcast. And then the Cathedral website comes up again and again. And then you've got Salt and Light, which is, Salt and Light, everyone knows who they are. And, they talk about the Cathedral podcast. Below Salt and Light is the Cathedral podcast on Apple Podcast. So when you do a search, the website comes out as the top result most of the time. Okay. Then putting the content on YouTube and Apple Podcasts is very, very important. YouTube is owned by Google. So when you do, say, a search on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan is, he's been in the news, and he's one of the most popular podcasts on the planet right now. And he also just sticks a camera when he has these interview-style podcasts, as you can see in the videos at the bottom of the screen capture. And when you look at the search results, right, you type in Joe Rogan podcast, his website, again, it's his website that shows up first. Then it's the podcast, then the videos, right? And then below that, you have everything else. But you see how, the Google algorithm functions, it works that way. So if you want people to discover your podcast, make sure you put it on a website or on a microsite, promote that microsite, or promote that website. Make sure you've got your podcasts all labeled properly, all the metadata is entered, and then also convert your podcast to videos. Now, the interesting thing about podcasting is that it's an audio soundtrack. You can actually take that audio soundtrack, repurpose it, and make it into a video. So you can either have you can actually animate 2D animation, make that into a video file, and put it up on YouTube, or you can do like Joe Rogan and a couple of other people do and do video podcasts where they stick a camera there and just record them in studio talking to each other, not giving any heed to the audience. The video podcast, I've got to make a distinction, is very different from a webinar, because a webinar tends to be the speaker engaging with the audience and showing slides and playing demos, like exactly what we're doing. A video podcast is, they're just talking to each other, and the viewer is incidental. Some people do video podcasts like having 2 or 3 speakers and they actually face the screen, and that's slightly different, but it's still a conversation where the viewer or the listener is passive. They're not really sort of like sitting down and this is a webinar. They're just looking at two, three blokes talking. Now, cross promotion and collaborations. Now, this is a very interesting thing. So Monocle, which is a French magazine, quite popular, they've also got a podcast section, and they did a cross promotion or collaboration with Chanel, and they've got a podcast series called Métier Class by Chanel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly in French, but essentially métier means the job or an occupation. And they do podcasts of everyone who has encounters or work with Chanel. So if you look at the latest episodes, they did the interview with Karl Lagerfeld when he, to talk about his fashion show. They've got Pharrell, who also did some work with Chanel. So, they have all these podcasts that talk about it. So you can download it for listening for later, or you can play it live and it streams to you. Now, in terms of cross promotions and collaborations, just like what I've done with Henson Lim and his Archippus podcast, he already has a series of books out, and he's got a website promoting the Archippus Awakening initiative. So he's got traffic there already. So I'm bringing another dimension to his book. And then the podcast is also heard on Cathedral's live streaming app, and sits on the app in the podcast section. So by collaborating this way, you're actually doing cross promotion, because I don't need to promote anything myself. And Henson's side would do the promotion. St. Andrew's Cathedral's streaming app, Cathedral SG Live, would promote the program as well. So doing cross promotions, or having other people doing other forms of podcasts, and you're a guest on their show, they're a guest on your show, that cross promotion actually works to help people discover your podcast a lot quicker and in a wider way. So how can I keep my podcast financially sustainable? And these are my last two slides. I'm going to just pull up a Patreon case study. There are other funding websites that you can use, or you can, speak to private investors. But Patreon is one; it's quite popular with some people. And you see this bloke, I've blocked him out, but it says he's creating podcasts to equip people in the marketplace. And this is the selector membership level. You can basic, intermediate, full sponsors, and all the entitlements are there. And you can go to a page like Patreon to actually then raise funding to make your podcast sustainable, because there are costs, and you're also spending time with it, right? And you want to be able to raise some money because you might want to upgrade your equipment, get better sound quality, or you might want to hire someone to do the audio engineering work for you, so that you can focus on creating the content instead of packaging the content. So there are different ways of doing it. There's a guy that I know who started a podcast show, and he features local Singaporean Christian music, and his shows are half an hour long. And he's gone to different organizations, so the Christian organizations and churches, and he's saying, look, this is what I do. Would you consider supporting me? And these organizations, give him a sum of money every month to keep things going. So there is that avenue as well. So friends and family, you can go to organizations that are aligned with that sort of content, or you can go to a public fundraising website like Patreon or GoFundMe, or one of these things. Yeah. So just to wrap up, podcasting for Christ, Romans 10:17, which we looked at, where hearing comes, where hearing comes by the word. This is the verse. These are the verses before that, and it says, "How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him who they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent?" And this is a call to all of you who are listening in, and you're obviously interested to find out more about podcasting. I hope I've shown you that using sound, using podcasts is a very powerful medium to reach out to people for Christ and to spread the word. And if you step up, look at how you can then help package something or create something that can allow people to hear the word in a much faster, much more efficient way. Podcasting might be the solution, might be the answer for you. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Keith. I will open for questions at this point. So if you have a question, this is the opportunity.
This is Audrey
Yes.
from Church of Our Savior.
Yes.
Earlier you spoke about how podcasts can actually, or radio and podcasts can form communities. It's kind of a passive community, isn't it? How would you recommend that we engage that community? Because if coming from church, if we ran a podcast, of course the first target is our church members, because of the phases of circuit breaker. We won't be able to meet as a church for quite a while. But then, of course, even with our videos, our video services and all that, it's going beyond our church. In fact, beyond Singapore. But how do we engage and gather in this community?
When you say community, are you speaking of the local community?
Whoever listens.
Okay. Okay, but you're rallying the community to keep following, or is there a purpose? I mean, are you rallying them to join up and participate in some way, like by giving, or there has to be an end goal there.
Of course, if you're local, then of course we try to put people in cell groups, even if they're virtual. But let's say if they are foreign, the main purpose for us reaching out this way, or even for church services and all that, is really discipleship. It's imparting the word. It's discipleship, getting people to serve, and it doesn't mean serve in church, but serve in the kingdom. But how do we want to move people from just being passive listeners to active doers. So how would you recommend that we gather in this community? I get it that we have to be on multimedia, like using web forms and all that, but how do you even identify them? How do you see that there is a following? For instance, Cathedra's podcast, how do you know how many people are following it and how many people are actively interacting with your podcast?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. For podcasts, the analytics that that you can tap on, you can tell basic information like how many people listen, what time they're listening. So you can tell your peak times, and you can tell the number of people that are listening. You can't zoom in to who or the profiles of the people who are listening. But you can tell which part of the world they're listening, and some people even provide whether they're on an iOS device or an Android device. In terms of looking at those figures, you would know then, okay, look, it seems that everyone seems to listen to the podcasts between 7 and 8:30 in the morning, between 12 to 1, during lunchtime, and between 5 and 7 when they're going home. So if you know those peak times, then there's an opportunity to schedule your programs around those times to be released. So you says, look, we've got this program that's on this particular topic. So if you're talking about joining cell groups, you could then place programs that are related to that. So it could be like a little interview style or fireside chat with people who are in cell groups and have experienced, who have testimonies to give. Who have things to say, like, look, before I went to cell, I felt kind of disconnected, and then I went through this thing, was with a cell, and they stood by me, when my husband was in the hospital, and that sort of stuff. And you build a community from there by seeding the desire or the need for them to join a cell group. I don't think you can use the podcasts or even the video content to compel someone to act. So even if church resumes tomorrow and everyone goes to church and sits in the service, and some guy comes up and gives his testimony and says, "Oh, and that's why you should join a cell group," ultimately you'll notice throughout the world, in every single church, it's about 10 to 15% of the people who are serving, and 85 to 90% of the people who just attend church, or who serve at the periphery on odd occasions like Christmas or Easter, or when they have an outreach. So I think that building the community, it's all about making sure that you've got programs that speak to that particular group, and you have content that speaks to their heart. But I don't think you can, for lack of a better word, close the sale with a podcast or even with video content. Does that make sense and answer the question?
Yeah, I think with different age groups, the engagement is different, of course. With the youth, they're totally in.
Yep.
We've seen more youth participation on online platforms than ever before.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think we I think anyone that is in church, on church staff right now, have had to really relook how we do church from now on, because the old style is never coming back, and we've already maybe I should turn on my video so everybody can see me. We've already looked at some. We had to look at some marketplace models. For instance, how say NFL or NBA or the sports channels. They have they obviously they want the people to come back to the stadiums, right? But they have very, very good online engagement. From videos to podcasts to radio shows to website, everything, and we in the church we really need to get on that level. I recently read an article by Reverend Hal, Pastor Hal from Heart of God Church, talking specifically about this, and so of course, yes, we have the 80-20 problem with church, whether it's live church or online church, but we do see that we need to at least hit a bigger target. We need to not say, okay, we're only going to get 20%, but we got to hit the 100% and find a way to disciple people on air, online.
That's a very good point. I mean, I'll just address this quickly before I go to the next question, because there's a question that just came in. To sort of add to that, I was just saying that like in the case of St Andrew's Cathedral, it's Anglican, and you're in Coos, so you understand the traditional Anglican structure. It's fairly rigid. Not as rigid as, say, the Methodist Church, but it's still fairly rigid and traditional. They've been around for close to 200 years. But the thing with them was that when COVID hit, the leadership was very quick to then switch everything to digital. So we helped them set up the streaming radio station in, the original timeline was 3 months. We had to get it done in 2 weeks. And we did. Not without a lot of bugs and not without a lot of teething problems, but we managed to do it. And it's even through World War II, you had people that were bringing themselves to St Andrew's Cathedral, which is, I think, one of the oldest churches in Singapore. But now it's turned on its head, and the church has to bring the church to people. But it's a huge culture shift. And it takes time, I think, for churchgoers to sort of like say, okay, look, I have to engage this way. And again, it comes back to what I was talking about, that a lot of people like and enjoy that the energy that it comes from, that comes from worshiping, in a hall with, 1,000 other people, and the energy you just get is very, very different from watching, the worship team on, streaming to you live. But I think it's a matter of getting used to, and like you're talking about the younger people, the digital natives, that's what they've grown up with. They watch concerts and, all sorts of funny things online. They're used to that. So people like you and I, of the same generation, we grew up with CD quality music and nothing else will do. But the younger people, MP3s, which are actually not as, good in quality, that's okay, So I think it takes time. But if you have a look at how the mega churches are doing it in the US, like Elevation Church, right? Elevation Church is a fantastic example, and they've got services, video services online. They convert their videos into podcasts. And that's in answer to Leo Barnizo's question. Elevation Church does take all their video messages and strip it out, and then just take that audio and make it into audio podcasts that they put on a Spotify channel. They've also got Elevation Music, so they've basically, very much like Audrey, what you were mentioning about the NBA and all these sports things, they have it everywhere. You have it everywhere. So the key for churches, or the key thing to learn, is that the minute someone asks you, says, "Oh, I heard that your church has quite good engagement online. Which channel or which platform are you on?" That's a wrong question, because it should be on. The answer from the church should be, "I don't know. I can never tell unless I asked every individual, because we're on all platforms." And if you look at Elevation Church, they're on Spotify, they're on Apple, they're on YouTube, they're on a website. And on Sundays, when Stephen Furtick preaches, he would just pick up his YouTube thing and he'll scroll, and there are people from Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, and New Zealand, and Australia, all watching the service live. So and giving to the church. So I think that the way that we approach the digital medium, I was just sitting down and speaking to Aaron, who works as one of the directors in TWR, and TWR is an American radio network, and they it's just a gospel Christian radio network, and they've gone online as well. And he was saying to me just a couple of months ago, before this lockdown, he said that never before in the history of mankind have we have the tools to reach out to people, because he said traditionally a missionary takes 4 years to train, and not everyone can be a missionary. Then we send them out, and once we send them out to wherever they're supposed to go, it takes years for them to establish trust, and it takes years for them to then get the message out. Then we've got to smuggle Bibles into China or wherever it is. And he said that for the first time we can do everything that's taken a decade and a half to do, in a year, because of technology. And I don't think I don't think God has allowed this without a purpose. I mean, we many people have said that we live in the last days, and I believe we are living in the latter half of the last days. And I think that there's no reason why everyone else in the world is on TikTok and on whatever it is, spreading all sorts of nonsense. Why Christians haven't risen up and taken this back and used it for the kingdom? Yeah.
I like to just come in here, right? I mean, it's 1.5 hours.
Oh, sorry about that.
I'm sure there's a lot more questions, right? Feel free to write in. I'll show a slide where you can write in for the slides, and also the recording that will be made available. And you can also post your questions, at the email, and then we'll forward to Keith, right? And keep the conversation going. I'm thankful that, I'm hearing that many of you are keen, right, to use any means. Podcasting is one, and other means to, engage the people, right, with the gospel. I mean, some ideas that I think we are all trying is, like, you can learn from the gaming community. I mean, it's huge, right? And they will say they have a real community, right, playing games. And actually, some Christians have used that community, right, to, rather than kind of play games, but, they are having conversations over that platform, because China don't block, right, those games. I mean, I've tried games among older people. Rummy Cup, you can play Rummy Cup online, and the older people, right, because it's a game that they are used to and they can play. And surprisingly, right, it is that game that persuaded them to come online, right? Before that, they say, no way, I'm ever going to come online. But after they've tried playing Rummy Cup online, they are now very, confident, right, to go to any platform. So I think the Lord is doing something during this COVID-19, right, even to the churches, right, to help us rethink, so that the gospel, I think that we have a chance now, right, to finally go to the ends of the world. Okay, so thanks for joining us. Like I say, I did put on the chat, right, the email that you can write to. I'll just close us in a word of prayer. I want to thank particularly Keith. Keith, thank you so much, right, for giving us, your experience, your skills, your passion in podcasting. I'm sure, inspired some of us, right, to do podcasting, and hopefully either for business or for the Lord. Come, let's pray. Father, we thank you for bringing us together. We thank you, Lord, that during this COVID time, you force all of us to rethink about many things, about our walk with you, about how we can engage the community that we can't see at this point. Help us, Lord, to be so creative like never before. Obviously, Lord, the tools exist. Podcasting is one of the tools. Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp. There's so many things out there that has disrupted the world, and yet, Lord, forgive us for playing catch up. So help us to catch up so that so many contents, that testify for you, that glorify you, will go far and finally to the ends of the world. In Jesus' name, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Can I just say one last thing before everyone goes?
Yeah.
And this also addresses Audrey's question earlier. Everyone talks about, the younger generation, they can get onto this platform. How do we reach out to the old? But then, especially in Singapore, have you seen the number of elderly people in their 70s walking around aimlessly playing Pokemon Go? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right? Pokemon Go. That is technology, that's AR technology that even I don't use. But, so there is a way to engage. And I think it's unprecedented times for us. The tools are there, like Shu Chen was praying, So why don't we take it back for the kingdom?
Amen.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All.